I'm Jackie Dixon, and you're watching VLX TV, where my goal is to help you get healthy, holy, and hot so you can serve the world for God in incredible ways. If you've watched the last two videos from the last 2 weeks, then you know that we're coming to the end of my personal story and why I call my business VLX and why this mission is so important to me. We've talked about how my ill relatives and the motto for my undergrad school were what fueled my desire to study medicine and to try to explain medical discoveries and research to people in layman's terms they could understand so they could avoid suffering that wasn't necessary. Then we talked about why I expanded my definition of health and wellness to include our emotional and relational and spiritual and mental and sexual wellness all into this picture of a flourishing person who's right with God and is living by his design. And finally, we talked about the fork in the road that I came to one winter in Paris when I had a decision to make about whether I was really going to continue to follow God and live by his commands, or if I was going to go off on my own way and make up my rules as I went along. You know that I came into a Christian community that loved me beautifully, but where I found that these topics were still not being sufficiently taught, and a lot of young women like me were kind of floundering, trying to figure out how to think about and care for their body, how to think about their appearance and their beauty, and how to have intimate relationships with themselves, with God, with their family and friends, and with a man that would flourish and be passionate for a lifetime. And I promised you that this week I would tell you the happy ending to this story and how I got to a place where I loved my body and cared for it well, where I understand beauty and its role, and where I have a flourishing relationship with God, myself, my family and friends, and a wonderful marriage with a man I adore. It really is all possible. But if there's anything that I want to convey in this video, it's that it takes action. There are seasons where we're waiting on God, but I don't believe that even those seasons are seasons where we should not keep preparing for what we feel we're called to and what we deeply long for. I know so many people who claim that they want something, but who are not taking the action steps to get there, and who seem to feel that God is just going to pick them up and plop them into that situation without any effort on their behalf. That's never been the case. Everywhere in the Bible, when God is interacting with us to achieve or create something extraordinary, he has to get a yes from us, essentially, permission to act in our lives, and then he has to have us involved and actively working toward the same outcome. For that, we have to be on the same page as God, which means we have to understand and know his priorities, and we have to know his commands by which we're supposed to do everything. But it also means that we have to have the confidence and courage in this calling and the know-how to get up and head in the right direction. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. While I was working at that church, so many of my unhealthy attitudes that I had accumulated over those past couple years of anger and bitterness and confusion and potentially wandering off the right path didn't come back full circle. I didn't go back to where I was before. I wasn't any longer having a legalistic view of my body. I wasn't any longer right with God, but just kind of unaware of the bigger picture. I came to a much bigger awareness of my role as a woman on this planet. So I didn't revert back to health. I got to a different picture of wellness that was so much more than I had ever imagined was possible or could conceive of. I realized that as a woman, I had a calling and a power to be an incredible leader in the world and to point people back to Jesus in a way that only women can. Men have their own role too. They have a powerful calling, but I am here to speak to women. And I am a woman too, so I know best what I'm doing myself. But while I was working at that church, these three areas finally started to flesh themselves out. And I got an idea of how they fit into the Christian life, and in fact, how critical they are in the Christian life, and what often happens when we ignore them or give them a lesser importance than they really have. So these are the areas, again, of our body, our appearance, and our relationships and intimacy. And I teach on these areas under the terms of body stewardship, beauty stewardship, and fearless intimacy. Like I told you last week, I dedicated myself to figuring these areas out. I both just watched the world and watched how people interact, which is often very different from the way they say they think or believe or what they say they do. When you really watch how it breaks down in human interactions on a day-to-day basis, it's often quite different. I read every book I could get my hands on, listened to audio trainings from the 80s and 70s all the way up to now. I talked to mentors and pastors and researchers and doctors and people who were experts in these fields. And I read the Bible. I spent time with God asking, what do I need to understand that I don't see yet? What is the point of this? And how does it all fit together, Lord? Why is this an area that so many people are so frustrated in often and still passionate about, and yet still so convinced that they're not important in the Christian life? What do I need to understand that connects these problems? Why are people so in anguish often about these areas that they deem frivolous, but that so control their lives often? I was seeing young women often who didn't like their weight or their appearance, or they weren't having success dating or in their marriage. And they often said that it wasn't as important as their spiritual life, but I came to very firmly disagree. Not because those are the most important things, but because they're often symptoms of something that's deeper, that's underlying, that is critical. And that is our relationship with God and our knowledge of and commitment to His Word and the commands in it. So I did this full 180 from my dark night of the soul in Paris to my commitment to figuring out how to live in a godly way in these areas. And I was on fire. I have no doubt the people I hung out with at that time heard nothing but the things that I was thinking about and thinking through. And I was probably a huge bore, but I was so passionate about figuring this out and bringing these ideas to life in a way that was practical for people to actually live, including me. Now, there were 3 huge transformations I had at that time, and believe it or not, they all tie in. First was how I came to love my body. I was still overweight. I still had a lot of that weight I had gained on me. But instead of beating myself up like I had for years, I had come to love and accept my body, and that actually led to me taking great care of it and finding a lifestyle that allowed me to enjoy myself completely and yet still be in great health. That is body stewardship, and that's what I teach in the body stewardship course, how to have this loving relationship with your body and with God so that from the inside out you care for yourself beautifully, drop the weight that your body doesn't need, and live flourishingly well because you're no longer tricked by poisons, nasty foods, and deadly attitudes toward yourself. Then there was my appearance, which in the young adult singles dating game is a mess. If any of you are in there or have been there, you know that the tension over looks and appearances and how no one really talks about who's cute and who's not, but that's clearly determining a lot of people's decisions and the way they value each other. It is sick. It really is sick and incredibly unhealthy. And yet to say that beauty doesn't matter is A, inaccurate, and B, never really going to work, because there are some reasons why we are fundamentally wired to be drawn to beauty. Not just people's beauty, but beauty in the world, little candles and little delights, all those things I was so mad at that I learned have an incredible importance, even in a world full of suffering, to keep our hearts light and our hearts full of hope. So that's what I teach in Beauty Stewardship, which is a coming course, and it's how do we know how to think about our beauty and then use our personal beauty and a little bit the beauty around us in our world and environment, but mostly our personal beauty, to lead people to Christ and point them to heaven, instead of using it as either a way of manipulating people to behave in certain ways or a way of thinking about ourselves more or less because of how we do or don't look at any given time. But the final piece, which I was really just grateful to God for bringing me around, because I was such a lost case there for a while, is I had become so bitter about the idea of marriage. I was just convinced after watching years of heartache that a happy marriage wasn't possible, that men truly couldn't love women for a lifetime, and that all of us were just going to kind of fade apart and become bitter and barking at each other all the time, and it just was not a commitment that was worth entering into. That's when all of this studying that I had done and the differences between what I saw around me as the norm and what I realized through the Word and through studying was possible came to light. And I realized what I've seen doesn't have to be the way that it is. The norm is not the necessary, is what I like to say. And I came to realize how a man and a woman could have this profound, passionate, pure, deep friendship and relationship, an incredibly fulfilling intimacy that was right with God, that kept both of them incredibly alive, and that made them both more powerful, if this was their calling, to serve God in incredible ways. That was a total 180, and the people who knew me then were quite aware that I had done a real 180 in my now fervent support of marriage and living by the commands leading up to it: abstinence before marriage, chastity in marriage, and fantastic intimacy within marriage as well. But how do you get there when you have been bombarded by these awful messages from our secular culture and images everywhere showing women's bodies used in totally inappropriate and just not complete ways? How do you get past how your heart has been so wounded by what people have told you, by the relationships that you have seen fail, by the long-standing unhappiness that people have expressed to you about their marriage? How do you move beyond that? If you've seen that in your family or in your peers, how do you see that and then still commit to an imperfect person for life and have it work? I've had people tell me, well, there's a 50% chance of divorce, so there's a 50% chance that my marriage is going to fail. And I've had to tell them, no. If you prepare well and you know what to look for in a spouse, your marriage can flourish. But what people are often looking for and what they're taught to do to prepare, which is often not much, unfortunately. The marriage conferences are all married couples, and I always tell singles, get to the marriage conferences if you want to learn about how to get married. But anyway, it's so possible to have a flourishing marriage, but it does require some extreme preparation, and long before I would say you really want to be married, because this is something that is a big undertaking, and the more you can understand about it, the more you can prepare for it, the more you will have a fantastic chance at not only a lifetime of togetherness, but of having great success. So, those are the 3 areas that I came around to feel, oh my gosh, there is a better way than what I've seen, and it's so important that we know, understand, and teach it. But not only that there was so many pieces that came into this. And that's where I realized we have to teach a bigger picture of femininity than what young women are learning now. And I say young women, but I've had women in their 60s and 70s come to me and had revelations, and they want to learn the same thing too. So this is really for women of all ages. But I'm focused on young women because I feel that we have the power to change our generation if we change the way we live, believe, and act. And that's what I'm so passionate about. So I was praying, Lord, how can I understand myself, and then how could I possibly teach this picture of powerful womanhood in a way that's comprehensible, that people can grasp, and then they can take steady steps toward becoming. Because I know this took me years. But it doesn't have to take you years. It doesn't have to take anyone else years. If there's a clear plan, if there's a clear path, then you don't have to try to figure it out on your own. Then you can move through these steps toward becoming this powerful woman so much more quickly. And that's when I discovered this concept, it just kind of came to me in prayer, of a biblical bombshell. And I wrote it out, okay, well, what would that look like? What is a powerful woman, not based on this cultural message, not based on that cultural message, but based on the Bible and based on how we can spread the gospel in the world? What does that look like? Taking into account these ideas of how important our body and our beauty and our intimate relationships are. And I came up with 12 pillars that make up a biblical bombshell. I am so excited to share them with you, but I am going to keep you a little bit in suspense because revealing them is the whole point of an online party I'm giving in just a week now. So I want you to stay tuned, and I want you to come so you can learn these 12 pillars for yourself. And hey, maybe you are already rocking it, and you're going to get there and say, dude, I already know this. Check. I have got this covered. I'm rocking it. And that's awesome. In which case, I would love just to have you join our community so you can reach out to other women and teach us all what you know. If you are curious though, and you know that you're stuck in certain areas of your life, and you're wondering if it's going to fall on those 12 pillars, then I really want you to be there. Because I'm going to cover each of those 12 topics and what we need to know and what we need to do to live and flourish in each area. So do make sure you RSVP so I can know you're coming, and definitely show up. There will be a replay, but there's going to be a special gift at the end for the people who are there live. So I would love to have you there, and I would love to have you bring your girlfriends. This is something that people can do from anywhere in the world. So if you just shoot them the link and say, look, I'm going to go to this party, you've got to come. This sounds like a really interesting topic, and then we can discuss it over coffee afterward. Do it. That would be phenomenal, and I would love to have your feedback about what your thoughts are. Hey, maybe there's a 13th pillar, and you guys are going to tell me what it is, and we can add it. So make sure you come. You'll get a PDF with a guide of these 12 pillars that you can see really clearly, and then I'm going to go over in depth what each one is and what it looks like to live them. And then I'm going to take any and all of your questions. So make sure you come. We're going to have a lot of fun, and hopefully you're going to have a whole new hope for what your life can look like and who you can be as a powerful woman of God. Now, one more thing that's really, really important. When I did all this preparation and study to figure out how to heal these wounds that I had, to get over all these incorrect beliefs and hurts and pains in all these areas, and I dedicated myself to figuring it out and finally came to this place of health, that is precisely when my husband walked in the door, quite literally, or up to me on the sidewalk, I guess if you prefer. And maybe it was a coincidence, but I believe just from my past, my history, and watching other people, that when we show God that we are serious about this, essentially we're being faithful with little, and then he trusts us to be faithful with much. We're showing that we are preparing for exactly what we're asking him to bring into our lives, whether it's a healthier body, a healthier relationship with our parents or with our family or friends, or a healthier marriage, or a marriage period, or a boyfriend, or a dating life. Often I think when we prepare our hearts to be open, to be holy, to be right in all of these areas, to understand them, and to be living them out and trying our best to become that woman, that's when the opportunities come. When we show that we have prepared and that we have been faithful in preparing, faithful in figuring it out and being on that journey, then God's like, that girl is ready. She is serious and she's ready to go to the next step. So just a thought, definitely no promises, but it was really interesting to me to realize that once I finally got over my self-righteousness, that I knew everything, and once I finally got over kind of just going through life waiting for God to bring the right person or do something, when I said, no, I'm taking action, I'm going to figure out what it takes to live this out, and I'm going to become it no matter how hard it is, that's when God brought in the next thing. And I have seen that happen so many times in my life. When I work to figure out how to live in a godly way in a certain area, and then almost before I can enjoy it, God's brought in the next level, the next new thing for me to conquer. And I wonder if you might have the same thing in store for you. So I definitely hope that you will consider preparing at least to become this incredibly powerful woman, and then seeing what kind of doors and opportunities open. So until I see you there, make sure you're following me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest so I can keep you inspired about being a biblical bombshell, and stay healthy, holy, and hot, and get out there and shine. God bless you, gorgeous. I'll see you next week.
Thank you.